My beloved child, can you feel it something deep within? You has been stirring something ancient and true. You are not imagining it, you are not alone. I am speaking directly to your heart, to your weariness, to your questions. The veil is thinning, and the truth is breaking through. You have been prepared for such a time as this. Listen carefully every word. Isaiah is part of the answer you've been praying for. Do not scroll away, do not silence this voice. This is the moment that could shift everything. Are you ready to hear what you were always meant to know? Then stay with me till the end, because your journey begins now. Do you know how long I waited? My hand never lowered, my voice never silenced, my presence never left. I was simply waiting, just waiting, while your heart wandered into deserts without water and embraced fires that burned without light. I watched you reach out to people who only echoed your pain instead of healing it, and it pierced me deeper than nails ever could. I knew you were searching for a part of me in them, but they didn't carry what only I could offer. I didn't knock once and then walk away. I kept returning every time you thought you were alone. I hoped you would notice the breeze that wasn't cold, the stillness that wasn't empty, and the warmth that didn't come from a fading sun. That was me, reaching for your soul with a love that never quits. When the world turned its back on you and you hid in your room, thinking no one saw the silent screams within your spirit, I did. I was still there, even when you celebrated others and secretly wondered why no one celebrated you. I stood behind the curtain of your pride, weeping and waiting, because my joy was always meant to be yours. I witnessed the brokenness you tried to bury beneath accomplishments that made everyone else proud but left you feeling empty. I whispered again, I'm still here. But you had filled your heart with so much noise that you convinced yourself my silence was absence, not mercy. I never left, never turned away, never reconsidered my love for you. Not once. Even as you wandered farther from the truth, I died to show you. I saw how you wore masks to be accepted. Each time you hid your true face from the world, I longed to kiss the scars beneath it, to heal what no amount of applause could reach. I waited through your spiritual amnesia, those days when you didn't even remember who you were to me, and still, I did not leave. I allowed time to stretch, not to punish you, but to protect you, to prepare a moment where everything would align, not by accident, but by divine design, so that when you looked around and found nothing holding you anymore, you might finally remember the door I stood at all along. I waited through betrayal, through heartbreak, through your striving and your rebellion, and not once did I remove my love from your name. You searched for what could only be found in me, but you didn't know how to come back, so you stayed away, thinking I wouldn't understand what you had become. But I already knew every twist and turn of your journey, every compromise, every detour, every collapse. I didn't count them against you, but as reasons why I needed to stay. I waited while the enemy whispered that I was tired of you, done with you, and disappointed in you. Yet I held your breath steady. I kept your soul from shattering and shielded you from a darkness you never even knew tried to reach you. I didn't stand at that door with folded arms. I stood there wounded for you, reaching, aching and longing, because I loved you before you had a name. I will love you long after the world forgets it. Every breath you've ever taken was a chance for this, for you to turn the handle and see not judgment, but mercy, not distance, but an embrace, not condemnation, but celebration. I never waited in pride, I waited in pain, the kind of pain only love endures, the kind that says, even if it takes your lifetime to open the door, I'll still be here when you finally do. You didn't realize you were dancing with illusions, embracing reflections that vanished as soon as you tried to hold them close. I saw you give your energy to people and pursuits that had no anchor, only to be left colder after each encounter. Yet still, you kept searching in the same empty wells, believing they would quench a thirst that grew deeper with every sip. You weren't foolish, you were desperate, and I understood that. I never rolled my eyes at your efforts. I wept for the brokenness that taught you to settle for less than sacred. You became skilled at survival, constantly adjusting yourself to fit into spaces never designed to hold your spirit. Even when everything inside you was screaming for release, you still tried to convince yourself it was normal to feel disconnected from peace. I stood near, my arms extended, aching to be the one you turned to when the rest turned their backs. Instead, you ran further into performances that cost you your authenticity. I watched you form relationships that drained your essence, and though you smiled in their presence, you cried alone afterward, wondering why you always felt unseen. I was there for each of those tears, not collecting them, but standing in front of them, wanting to catch them before they ever fell. And still, you wouldn't turn around. Your loyalty to the wrong things broke me, not because I was offended, but because I knew how much it was costing your heart. I had already paid that price in full. I saw how you tried to convince yourself you didn't need anyone, when all you truly needed was to rest, not perform. I placed interruptions along your path, moments meant to wake you up, but you mistook them for bad luck or punishment. You tightened your grip on things that were slipping away for a reason. The more you pursued what couldn't hold you, the more you lost parts of yourself you once loved. I tried to slow the spiral, to breathe reminders of your value into your soul through strangers, lyrics, and dreams. But the voices of fear had grown too loud. You believed that turning to me meant admitting defeat. It was never about failure. It was always about coming home. You couldn't see me as safety when your life had only shown you conditions and consequences. So I waited still, never once flinching in my posture of welcome, never lowering my hands, though they trembled with the weight of all you were running from. I heard you when you said, "No one really gets me." I wanted to shout, "I do," but I knew you'd only hear silence, unless your heart was quiet enough to listen again. So I chose to keep watching, not because I was passive, but because I refused to override your freedom. I loved you too much to force myself where I had not been invited. But don't ever think I wasn't involved. I protected you in the dark, held back devastation that should have reached you, and stood between you and the ruin the enemy planned to use as your end. I watched you hand over your worth to people who didn't even know how to cherish their own. And I whispered softly, "You're more than what they see." But you had trained your ears to hear validation only from temporary mouths. So I stayed, not in absence, but in agony, watching, waiting, longing and aching. Because when you finally turned around, I didn't want you to meet judgment. I wanted you to meet love, and so I stayed in position, unwavering, unyielding, and unrelenting, because even if you couldn't look back, I never stopped looking at you. There was never a single moment when your sadness was invisible to me. I felt the exact pressure in your chest when you held back emotion just to seem strong. I was with you when you stared at the ceiling in the stillness of night, pretending you were okay, telling yourself that silence was strength, and yet inside you were drowning. I didn't merely observe your agony, I experienced it with you. The ache in your soul was something I absorbed as my own. But what broke me deeper than the wounds of your sorrow was the wall you built between us. Convinced, I remained indifferent. You stopped speaking to me because you thought I wasn't listening. You stopped reaching for me because you assumed I had better things to do. You saw others receive what they prayed for and buried the conclusion that you must not matter enough. That buried lie became the barrier you thought was truth. Yet I never abandoned you. I saw how you tried to interpret unanswered situations as rejection when they were actually redirections layered with unseen mercy. But you mistook my protection as punishment, my delays as denial, and my waiting as withholding. In that deep misunderstanding, you pulled further away from the arms that were still stretched toward you. You wept into your pillow and then wiped your own tears. thinking you had no choice but to handle life alone. But every single drop that fell from your eyes became sacred to me. None of them hit the ground unnoticed. You didn't see how I surrounded you with invisible arms, how I held your soul intact when your thoughts tried to fracture it, how I calmed storms that raged within while you screamed internally with no one to answer. You believed that my silence meant disinterest, but child, I was closer than breath, absorbing your pain so it wouldn't destroy you entirely. You assumed I stayed away because you weren't worthy, but the truth is, I never left your side, not even for a breath. You gave up on hope because hope felt like a cruel joke. Every time you expected change, things seemed to worsen, and that disillusionment made you retreat into numbness. I watched as you trained yourself not to feel too deeply, to not believe too fully, to not care too much. And still, I longed to heal the fracture within your belief. Not once did I turn my eyes from you. Not once did I grow tired of your cries. You thought your emotions were too much for me to handle, but I created those depths inside you, not to destroy you, but to draw you closer to the one who could carry it all. I never ignored your pain. I interceded in it. I covered you in ways you didn't recognize, because if I had answered in the way you expected, it would have given you relief, but not restoration. And I love you too deeply to settle for partial healing. What tore me apart was your conclusion that I had distanced myself. You assumed I wasn't grieving with you when you collapsed, but I was the one keeping your heart beating, your lungs filling, your soul from collapsing into utter despair. I cried with you, not once, but over and over again. Every time you asked, "Do you even see me?" my answer was in every sunrise that met your eyes, every breath that returned to your lungs, every gentle tug in your spirit to keep going. But your grief blurred your vision, and the darkness seemed more real than my nearness. Still, I didn't announce myself with flashes or thunder, because I wanted you to know me in the quiet, where your soul could finally distinguish my love from your pain. And now, as the weight slowly begins to lift, and you dare to wonder if I was there all along, I was. I watched you shrink into the background of your own identity. It wasn't your imperfections that grieved me. It was your detachment from the truth I've spoken over you since the beginning. You allowed the voices of doubt, shame, and past pain to overwrite my promises. In doing so, you began to believe that you were just another forgotten soul fading into the crowd. But I never designed you to disappear. I called you by name before the world ever formed its opinions. I shaped you with intentionality, with wonder, with a divine spark that no failure could extinguish. But slowly, as rejection left its fingerprints and fear etched its lies into your thinking, you began to let go of the mirror I held up for you. You looked into the reflection of your mistakes, your delays, your unspoken regrets, and called them your definition. Each time you did, I wept, not out of disappointment in your decisions, but because you no longer remembered what I see when I look at you. You carried labels that were never from me. You believed stories that never came from my heart. You measured your value by outcomes instead of origin. And through it all, I never stopped whispering reminders, not because I needed you to achieve something, but because I wanted you to live from who you already are. I watched as you compromised your light just to keep peace with people who never understood your depth. I saw you adjust yourself, dumb down, silence your voice, and twist your worth just to avoid standing alone. But beloved, I never called you to be understood by everyone. I called you to be embraced by me. The pain I carried wasn't because of your detours. It was from watching you settle for half-truths, believing you had to earn a love that was always yours. You walked through rooms pretending you didn't carry greatness, and I wanted to reach through the veil of insecurity and shake you awake to the divine reality pulsing beneath your skin. You stopped dreaming boldly, because life told you that dreamers end up wounded. and I mourned the day you exchanged vision for survival. I wasn't watching your progress with a scorecard. I was tracing every flicker of your divine design that the world tried to erase. You listened to the critics, the comparisons, the inner judgment that whispered you weren't enough. And yet I stood there, longing for you to come close enough to hear my version of your story. You weren't created for shame. You were born for significance. You carry a piece of eternity no one else can replicate. When you forgot that, when you looked in the mirror and saw only flaws, my heart broke because I knew the masterpiece I had formed was being rejected by the one it was made for. I was never asking for perfection. I was longing for connection. I cried not because of your brokenness, but because you stopped believing that you were still beautiful inside it. My hands never let go of your identity, even when you dropped it. My spirit never ceased calling you chosen, even when you called yourself unworthy. I have seen the royalty hidden beneath the ruins. I've never given up on reminding you, even if the reminders came in the form of interruptions, inner longing, or unexpected stillness. I didn't cry because you fell short. I wept because you forgot you were always enough through me. You are not the sum of your wounds. You are the child of the one who conquered death to restore your identity. I will keep pursuing you until that truth becomes your anchor again, until you walk with the confidence of someone who knows they are deeply, permanently, fiercely mine. I wove patterns into your days, creating moments that carried more meaning than you knew, hoping you'd pause long enough to sense that something sacred was drawing near. Every time the wind shifted unexpectedly or a stranger said something your soul had been silently thinking, that was me speaking, not loudly, but clearly enough for the heart that still remembers how to listen. But your thoughts were often preoccupied with distractions that promised more than they delivered. And though my signs brushed against your life with delicate insistence, you labeled them as chance, overlooked them, and pressed forward with your plans. I wasn't trying to overwhelm you. I was reaching for the quiet part of you that still longs to believe. When a song stopped you in your tracks, or when tears came without explanation during a moment you thought was random, that was not an accident. That was intimacy. But you dismissed them, thinking they were just fleeting emotions or unexplained thoughts. And still I tried again. When you nearly texted someone to say sorry but then deleted it, I was the one urging you toward restoration. When you paused before making a decision, unsure why you felt uneasy, the discomfort was a shield I raised to protect you. But the world trained you to ignore my movement unless it came through spectacle. So when I whispered through the ordinary, you brushed past it like fog, unaware that divinity was resting right beside you. It wasn't because you were hard-hearted. You were simply overwhelmed, taught to be skeptical, and convinced that real answers came through logic or proof. But my kingdom doesn't operate by those rules. I spoke through a burning bush once, yes, but now I speak through flickers in the soul, through divine discomforts, through repeated phrases you hear from unrelated places, through silence that suddenly feels heavy with meaning. I prompted you to stop scrolling at just the right second, to look up when you felt alone, to hear a line from a child's voice that carried the echo of heaven. But each time you questioned if it really meant something, I wasn't disappointed. I just kept trying. I didn't grow weary of pursuing you. I only longed for the moment your spirit would pause long enough to recognize that I was near. Every delayed train, every rescheduled plan, every dream that lingered in your chest long after you woke, all of it was layered with my fingerprint. Even your frustration with the way things were was me trying to awaken you to the idea that they weren't supposed to stay that way. You called them detours, but I called them signals. You said they were delays, but they were doors meant to realign your path with purpose. I stirred hunger in your spirit even when everything around you looked fine. because I knew that no external achievement could replace the deep ache for something eternal. Even though you brushed off those moments, they didn't vanish. They've been quietly collecting in your memory, waiting for the day you'd look back and realize none of them were isolated. They were a conversation, not incomplete messages, but interconnected echoes from heaven reaching for you in ways your language couldn't translate at the time. I don't stop communicating just because you didn't recognize it. I just find new ways to reach you. I am not the God of coincidence. I am the Lord of divine precision, and I have never stopped speaking, even if my voice didn't sound like what you expected. There were moments when what you clung to suddenly crumbled, and you thought it was punishment, misfortune, or a cruel twist of fate, but I was behind it all, not out of cruelty, but mercy disguised in destruction. I allowed what looked stable to give way, not because I took pleasure in your unraveling, but because I saw that it was already failing you behind the scenes. You didn't see the fractures, you only saw the surface, holding on to it like it was your lifeline, unaware that it was slowly draining the parts of you I created to thrive. When the relationships collapsed, when the doors shut tight without warning, when the plans you poured your energy into dissolved before your eyes, I was the one pulling you out from under what would have buried you if left unchecked. You prayed for strength, and I gave you truth. You asked for growth, and I gave you a clearer view. But to receive that clarity, I had to allow certain illusions to dissolve. It was never about loss. It was always about protection. You couldn't see the weight those things added to your soul until I removed them. Suddenly, you could breathe again, even if it hurt at first. I knew that if I didn't intervene, you would keep constructing your sense of identity around fragile things. Eventually, when they broke, they would take pieces of you with them. So I stepped in, not with a sword, but with a shaking, gently but firmly loosening your grip on what you were never meant to carry. It wasn't rejection, it was redirection. I never turned away from you in those moments. I turned you away from what was hindering the real you. You cried over what you thought you needed, and I stood with you in those tears, not aloof or angry, but holding you in the invisible space between confusion and healing. You felt abandoned by what once made you feel safe, but that safety was false, temporary, and conditional. I wanted you to experience something eternal, unshakable, and pure. I wasn't interested in watching you succeed in a system that slowly silenced your spirit. I longed to see you flourish in a space where you didn't have to hide, adjust, or compromise just to survive. And so I allowed the collapse, not to destroy your faith, but to awaken it. You prayed for answers, and I gave you awakening. You asked me to bless what was harming you, and instead, I rerouted you to what would actually heal you. A delay wasn't punishment, it was preservation. I delayed that dream not because it was wrong, but because the version of you who would have entered it then would have been crushed under its weight. I withheld no good thing from you. I simply waited until you could receive it as the healed, whole, and anchored child I always knew you were becoming. I never found joy in watching your heart ache, but I knew that if it didn't break then, it would have shattered later, and I could not allow that. You thought you were being stripped, but I was actually refining. I didn't remove comfort to cause you to suffer. I cleared the clutter so you could recognize the kind of peace that doesn't leave when circumstances change. Every time something left, I stood ready to fill the space. But I didn't rush because I wanted you to realize for yourself that I wasn't one of the options. I was the foundation you needed all along. And now, even if it still stings, you're beginning to realize that what you lost was never meant to define you. You're beginning to see that my presence was never dependent on your stability. In the middle of the mess, I remained steady, holding the pieces, waiting for you to notice that everything that failed you pointed back to the one who never would. You handed pieces of your heart to hands that weren't equipped to hold them. I didn't stop you, not because I didn't care, but because I knew your story wouldn't end in that pain. I watched from a distance as you opened yourself up to people who promised permanence but delivered abandonment. And though every letdown etched new wounds, I never stepped away. Instead, I stood behind the veil of your awareness, whispering strength into your spirit when you couldn't find it in yourself. I knew the intentions of those you trusted. I saw the cracks beneath their smiles and allowed their masks to fall, not to wound you further, but to reveal the truth you refused to see. You confused attachment for affection, silence for safety, and effort for worth. While you sacrificed your own joy to keep others comfortable, I wept for the unseen cost it took from you every single day. You tried to earn loyalty by shrinking yourself, watering down your needs just to keep proximity, believing that if you were quieter, easier, more useful, you'd finally be chosen fully. But child, I never asked you to become less for anyone. I created you to carry depth, not to be digested in fragments. While they overlooked your value, I treasured the very essence they dismissed. I saw your soul light up with kindness, your loyalty stretch beyond what was deserved. And even when your love was misused, I celebrated the purity of your intention. You weren't wrong for loving deeply. You were simply misdirected. But that love, even in brokenness, revealed my nature in you. You were never too much. They were just not enough to match the magnitude of your spirit. When they betrayed you, I caught every emotion that crashed afterward. When you blamed yourself for being naive, I reminded the heavens that you were still learning, still growing, still learning the difference between sacrifice and self-erasure. You placed your hopes in people who made promises they never intended to keep. Each time those expectations collapsed, I held space for your pain. You thought no one noticed how hard you tried, how often you stayed when you should have walked away, but I did. I watched you smile through the ache, stay silent through injustice, and give grace to those who never asked for it, and still return with open arms when they failed to reciprocate. That isn't weakness, that's the divine within you. But I had to let those chapters close because you deserved more than being an afterthought in someone else's story. I let them walk away. I didn't chase them because I was too busy chasing you. You believed you lost something meaningful, but all you lost was the version of love that asked you to bleed just to be seen. I waited until you had nothing left to give them so that you could finally receive from me what they never had the capacity to provide. Your love had limits, mine does not. They required conditions. I give without prerequisites. Their attention faded when you weren't performing, but my focus never left you, even when you couldn't bring yourself to pray. They saw the surface. I've held your every layer. So don't think of those exits as a defeat. See them as divine rescue missions. I let what wasn't love expose itself, not to break your hope, but to clear the path for something holy to enter. I didn't let them stay because I refused to let you remain unseen. I'm not the one who walks away when you need me. I'm the one who kneels beside you, even when you're unsure what's left of you to hold. So if you feel like you've lost everything, I need you to understand. You're just now discovering what real love feels like. I've been here waiting, not just to mend what shattered, but to give you something unshakable. Something that doesn't ask you to prove yourself. Type yes if you are ready for the blessings that you are about to receive. And if you believe in Christianity, kindly show your support for our community by contributing super thanks from $50 to $100. There were moments you turned your back without realizing it, overwhelmed by the weight of what you were carrying, convinced I had nothing left to offer you. Even when you stopped talking to me, when your silence grew heavy and your heart began to harden from disappointment, I didn't walk away. I simply stepped back enough to let you decide, not to abandon, but to give you space. Because love, real love, waits without forcing. I remained close enough to reach you if you called, but far enough that you could pretend I wasn't there if that's what your pain demanded. I didn't flinch when you ignored my presence. I didn't retreat in offense. I stood in stillness, absorbing the ache of separation. Not because I couldn't leave, but because I refused to. You believed your anger pushed me out, but it only revealed how deeply I mattered to your soul. And still, I stayed. I didn't resist the pain of your withdrawal. I took it in full, bearing the weight of your distance with the same patience that bore your name into eternity. I saw how you locked your feelings behind walls built by fear, how you whispered to yourself, if he really cared, he would have fixed this by now. Though those words pierced through me like thorns, I never gave up waiting for the day your eyes would open again. I didn't want you to follow me out of obligation. I longed for you to look toward me because your heart remembered who I was, not because you feared what might happen if you didn't. I watched your energy go toward things that never gave you rest. I witnessed the way you numbed yourself just to make it through, and how you convinced yourself that maybe my silence meant I had finally let go. But I hadn't. I watched as your laughter faded over time, how your joy became a memory instead of your reality. All the while, I longed to reach for your face and remind you that nothing, absolutely nothing, could make me love you less. Even as you questioned everything we once shared, even as you erased our history in your mind and rewrote the narrative to protect yourself from disappointment, I didn't shift. I didn't stop hoping for your return. I stood there, bleeding in love, longing for just one moment, not of perfection, not of confession, but of recognition. I didn't need you to get it all right. I just needed your heart to remember mine. I stayed through the silence, through the denial, through the forgetfulness. I never stopped watching over you when you drove late at night with tears blurring your vision. I never stopped holding your breath steady when anxiety overtook you. I never stopped sheltering you, even when your words claimed you didn't want me anymore. Because I knew the truth. Your soul was still mine, even if your mouth couldn't say it yet. You thought you were too far, too cold, too disconnected for me to care. But I don't operate by distance the way the world does. My love doesn't vanish when ignored. It endures. It waits. It bleeds. It hopes again. When you said, "Leave me alone," I didn't hear rejection. I heard pain that hadn't been comforted yet. I knew your voice was trying to protect a wound too tender to expose. So I remained, not demanding anything, not forcing conversation, just waiting for the moment when you might look up again, even briefly. Because if your eyes ever met mine again, even for a heartbeat, I knew everything could change. Not because I had moved, but because you would finally see that I never did. I've been here, aching quietly, never ceasing, always hoping that the same heart that once ran toward me with fire would one day turn back with even a flicker, and I would meet that flicker with a flame. You were surrounded by people and still felt invisible. You walked into rooms and left when you had to, nodded when it was expected, and spoke only what you thought they wanted to hear. But I watched what they couldn't see. The moment your eyes lost their sparkle, as soon as no one was looking, the way your thoughts raced when everything around you was still. You tried to convince yourself you were fine because admitting otherwise felt too heavy, too exposing, too unfamiliar. So you layered your emotions behind careful replies and polite smiles, all while I stood in the background, aching to step forward and silence the tormenting whisper that kept repeating that you were forgotten. I never agreed with that voice. I never authorized those words. Yet you believed them because they echoed what life had shown you: absence, inconsistency, dismissal. I longed to silence every unspoken belief that made you think you were too much or not enough. That inner dialogue didn't come from me, but you treated it like truth. You let it grow roots, and with time, it began shaping how you saw the world and yourself. Even in your quietest moments, I saw you reaching for understanding. I felt your heart cry out without forming words. You didn't want anyone to notice your exhaustion, but I noticed every single second you forced yourself to hold it all together. You tried to fix yourself in silence, hoping one day you'd finally be okay enough to let someone in. But you didn't need to become flawless to be worthy of love, especially not mine. What grieved me the most wasn't your struggle. It was your belief that you had to hide it from me. I wanted to step into that darkness and sit with you in it. Not rush you out, not fix you like a broken object, but hold space for you to breathe again without pretending. You were never a burden to me. Your heaviness never scared me away. I'm the one who sees every tangled thought, every unfiltered emotion, every unspoken fear, and stays. I knew what you were carrying, and I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I leaned in. You saw your tears as weakness, but I saw them as sacred. Proof that your soul still longs to feel, to hope, to heal. Each night you stared at the ceiling, wondering why it still hurt, wondering why no one could see the weight you were under. I was there, not just near, but mourning with you. I didn't want to rescue you with noise. I wanted to draw close in the quiet where your heart could finally recognize my nearness. The lie said you were unwanted, but I formed you with intention. The lie said no one stays, but I remain through every storm. The lie said you're alone, but I have never taken my eyes off you. You battled thoughts that didn't belong to you, and still, I covered you with compassion. You stood in crowded spaces and felt emptier than ever, and I stood beside you, waiting for you to realize that the presence you were missing wasn't just people, it was me. I wasn't far. I was speaking in the background of every anxious moment, every fake smile, every ache behind your eyes. Though it seemed like I was quiet, I was louder than every lie, just waiting for you to stop and hear the truth that had never changed. You are not alone. You are seen. You are understood. Not in part, not in sorrow, but fully, wholly, entirely. I saw the exhaustion behind your eyes and the silent prayer that said, "Please let someone notice." I did. I always have. And I have never stopped trying to reach that part of you that believes otherwise. Even when your own thoughts turned against you, I held tightly to the version of you untouched by despair. And I will never stop calling you back to it. You didn't speak the question out loud at first. It came as a thought in the quiet when nothing around you made sense, and everything inside you felt stretched too thin. You stood still, hoping for some kind of divine proof, for a flicker, a breeze, a moment that would make you certain I hadn't left you behind. But all you felt was stillness. So you assumed I must have gone, that maybe, just maybe, I had moved on to someone else, more deserving, more faithful, more whole. But I hadn't. I was closer than the breath you took while questioning me. I was beside you when the world grew dim and your prayers lost their words. I heard the whisper of your soul when your voice fell silent. That whisper wasn't ignored. It became sacred to me. Even when you thought you'd stopped believing, the very ache to feel me again was proof that your heart still remembered. You assumed I had changed locations because everything familiar had crumbled. But I never shift when your circumstances do. I anchor myself even deeper when the ground beneath you is shaking. I didn't drift into the background. Your pain just became so loud, it blurred the sound of my presence. But I was there, not watching from afar, not passively waiting. I was right there in the uncertainty, in the ache, in the space between your disappointment and your last ounce of hope. I didn't need your confidence to remain. I remained even when you questioned everything. The seasons changed around you, but I remained constant. Your emotions fluctuated, but my affection never wavered. You looked for me in dramatic answers, in fire from heaven moments, but I came in the form of steadiness. I came in the moments you didn't collapse even when you thought you would. I came through the stranger who smiled at you when you were drowning internally. I showed up in the comfort that wrapped around your soul when no one else could see you falling apart. You thought I would leave if you grew quiet, if your faith cracked, if your mind got tired of holding everything together. But I don't need you to be strong for me to stay. I remain through confusion. I sit in the chaos with you. You cried out, "Where are you?" And I was already surrounding you, wrapping you in compassion even before you noticed it. The problem wasn't that I left. The problem was that you were measuring my presence by what you could feel, forgetting that I'm not limited by your senses. I wasn't gone. You just lost sight of me under the weight of what the world demanded from you. I don't blame you for that. I don't hold it against you. Your ability to perceive me isn't what makes me faithful. I am faithful because that's who I've always been. You were searching for signs, but I was becoming your sustainer. You wanted answers, but I was already being your anchor. I didn't leave when the lights went out. I became your light in the unseen places. You asked where I was, but I was right there when you almost gave up. I was the unseen strength that kept you reaching for one more day. I was the stillness that held your mind when fear tried to hijack your peace. I didn't need to make a spectacle to be real. I was proving my love through presence, not performance. And now, as you begin to recall that cry, "Where are you?" I need you to know I never moved. You may have wandered, you may have questioned, you may have closed your eyes for a time, but my love never budged, never shifted, never gave up on being exactly where you needed me to be, even when you didn't recognize it. What pierced me wasn't your failures, not the moments you stumbled or the times you acted from wounds instead of wisdom. It was that you thought your weakness could cancel my compassion. You assumed your missteps created a distance I couldn't cross, when in truth, I was already standing in the space you thought was too wide. You wrapped yourself in guilt as if it were your identity, convinced that every wrong decision had permanently separated you from my embrace. But child, I never turned away from you because of your brokenness. I moved closer. Type yes if you are ready for the blessings that you are about to receive. And if you believe in Christianity, kindly show your support for our community by contributing super thanks from $50 to $100. It was never your imperfection that made me ache. It was watching you shrink away from me, afraid that I'd be angry, afraid that I'd love you less, afraid that I'd given up on you because you hadn't gotten everything right. That belief landed like a dagger. I never expected you to be flawless. I knew the battles you'd face, the temptations that would lure, the pain that would shape choices you never intended to make. I understood the inner conflict. I saw the layers of hurt that distorted your view. What broke me wasn't the decisions you regret. It was watching you sit in that regret, as if it were a prison, and I never gave you the key to escape. I never wanted you to carry shame. I absorbed that on the cross, and yet you lived beneath a weight I already lifted, as if my sacrifice wasn't big enough to reach your specific darkness. You replayed the moments you wished you could erase, trying to punish yourself with silence, thinking you needed to suffer longer before you could be loved again. But I never asked you to pay penance. I asked you to come home. You hid your heart, thinking it was too stained to be welcomed, when I had already prepared the celebration for your return. I wasn't sitting on a throne with arms crossed. I was running toward you with open arms while you rehearsed an apology I never required. What you thought disqualified you was the very reason I came. I don't rescue perfect people. I heal the hurting. I restore the weary. I forgive without flinching. I saw your worst moments and still declared you worthy of grace. And yet you sat in silence, ashamed to speak my name as though I had changed my posture toward you. I didn't. I never do. My love isn't fragile like human approval. It doesn't vanish when you're inconsistent. It doesn't dissolve when you fail. It remains. It fights for you when you stop fighting for yourself. It guards your destiny when you forget you have one. I know every detail of your story, even the chapters you hope no one ever reads, and I have not flinched once. The pain I endured wasn't from the act itself, but from watching you believe you were now unlovable because of it. That belief built walls around your heart that I longed to break through, not to expose you, but to rescue you from the lie that says, I only dwell with the worthy. There is no such thing as earning what I give freely. Your story didn't end in failure, it paused in fear. But I have been waiting, not with judgment but with compassion so deep, so fierce, so immovable, that it covers the very things you were taught to hide. I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to bring you back into the light you were made for. So let go of the self-punishment. Release the notion that I only dwell with the pure. I came for the wounded, the weary, the ones who think they've gone too far. I never changed my view of you. The only thing clouded was your belief in my forgiveness. And now, as that cloud begins to lift, I want you to see what I've seen all along. Not your record, not your regret, but your redemption. And it was never beyond reach. You tried so hard to earn your place, to get everything in order, to prove you were finally worthy of being restored. You measured your progress, counted your missteps, and constantly questioned if you had done enough to deserve my presence again. But I never asked for performance. I was never interested in the version of you that wore masks and recited lines you didn't believe. I've been waiting for the moment you'd finally drop the script and show me the raw, trembling, unfiltered version of your soul, because that's where healing truly begins. I didn't fall in love with your image. I've always loved the reality of who you are. But somewhere along the way, you were taught that love had to be earned through perfection, that flaws made you less desirable, that weakness made you disposable. So you kept striving, thinking if you just got strong enough, consistent enough, disciplined enough, I'd come closer. But I was already close, not because of what you did, but because of who you are to me. You believed the lie that wholeness came from self-effort. So you built up walls of control, layers of performance, and routines that looked impressive on the outside but left you exhausted inside. You tried to heal yourself by managing appearances, convincing others and yourself that you had it all together. But the truth is, I never needed you to fix what was broken. I only needed you to surrender it. I didn't need cleaned up wounds. I wanted to touch the bleeding places you were too afraid to acknowledge. I never flinched at your pain. I never backed away from your confusion. But every time you chose striving over surrender, you delayed the encounter I longed to have with your heart. You thought you needed to climb out of the pit first, but I was already at the bottom, waiting to carry you out. You thought progress had to precede intimacy, that you had to check off enough spiritual boxes before you could be close to me again. But I never asked you to prove yourself. I just asked you to trust me. I waited through your self-imposed pressure, your internal deadlines, your secret guilt, all because I knew you were chasing an illusion that would never bring peace. I knew that eventually you'd come to the end of that exhausting cycle. That's when I could finally do what you'd been longing for all along. Not repair your performance, but restore your heart. I'm not impressed by effort that comes from fear. I'm moved by honesty that comes from love. I don't need you to hide your scars. I want to touch them. I don't require that you fix your behavior before approaching me. I just want you to approach me. Let me be the one who mends what's been torn, who calms the storm you've been trying to control with your own strength. I've seen the pressure you've placed on yourself, the late-night self-criticism, the constant measuring, the shame when you fall short of impossible standards. That pressure didn't come from me. It came from wounds you thought you had to carry alone. But I've been here all along, not asking you to be more, but asking you to let me in. There is no healing in hiding, no freedom in pretending, no transformation in striving, Only when you lay it all down, when you finally exhale and say, I can't do this alone anymore, does the real healing begin. And even then, I don't demand perfection tomorrow. I walk with you today, one moment at a time, one breath at a time, one wound at a time. You don't have to become flawless. You just have to be willing to let me be what no effort ever could be, the restorer of your soul. You mistook my silence for dissatisfaction. You read the weight of your own self-judgment into my tone and assumed I stood far off, arms crossed, waiting for you to improve before I drew near again. But that image never came from me. That feeling of constantly falling short, of never measuring up, of being too flawed for closeness, it didn't reflect my heart. I never looked at you with condemnation. I looked at you with longing. My ache wasn't for what you failed to do. It was for the love you failed to feel. You believed I was keeping account of your failures, but I was busy treasuring the moments you whispered my name in uncertainty. Every time you turned your face toward me, even just for a second, something moved in me. I took joy in your nearness, even when your hands were empty, even when your steps faltered. You've lived under pressure to impress, to get it right, to do enough, to be enough. But I was never asking for you to earn what I've always freely given. You kept expecting me to react like others had, with withdrawal, disappointment, quiet distance. But I never operated from that broken pattern. I am not the one who leaves when you falter. I am the one who leans in closer. My heart doesn't tighten in frustration when you stumble. It burns with compassion because I see what you're trying to carry, and I know how heavy it's been. You thought I watched you with disapproval, but I was watching with a love that had nowhere to go, because you had built walls made of assumptions, not realizing I was still on the other side with open arms. Every time you doubted your value, my heart broke. Not because I needed affirmation from you, but because I wanted you to walk in the freedom that comes from knowing you're deeply cherished, regardless of your performance. I never once lost delight in you. Even in your weakest moments, I saw the goodness I placed inside you still shining. Even when you forgot how to pray, I heard the language of your tears. Even when you felt disconnected, I was still thrilled just to be near you. You think delight only belongs to the worthy, but my joy in you is not transactional. It's rooted in a truth that doesn't change with your behavior. You don't have to be the strongest, the wisest, or the most faithful to bring me joy. Your very existence was born from my love. You are my creation, and nothing you do can strip away the original beauty I breathed into you. When you fail, I don't roll my eyes, I reach for you. When you're discouraged, I don't withdraw. I whisper even louder, you're still mine. I waited not for your perfection, but for your awareness. I longed for you to realize that the heaviness you've been carrying wasn't from me. I don't use shame to bring you close. I use kindness. And the day you begin to feel that again, the day you stop assuming I'm distant and start realizing how near I've been all along, is the day the joy I've always had for you will finally become your own. I've been smiling over you while you've been frowning at yourself. I've been singing over you while you've been silent inside. I've been celebrating you while you've been trying to earn a place that's never been at risk. My delight isn't delayed until you improve. It's present right now in this very breath, in this very moment, because I'm not in love with a future version of you. I'm in love with you right here where you are, and that has never changed. You move so quickly some days, swiping through life in fragments, eyes glazed from too much noise and too little rest, fingers tapping past the very moments I sent as reminders that I was right there. I placed stillness in your path, hoping it would catch your breath before your anxiety did. I surrounded you with beauty disguised as routine, a line in a song you barely noticed, a color in the sky that felt oddly familiar, a message hidden inside a stranger's words. But your mind was tired. Your heart was full of survival. You needed answers, direction, clarity, but you thought they'd come louder, more dramatic, more obvious. So you passed them by. I wasn't offended. I didn't withdraw. I didn't punish you for the times you looked the other way or filled your ears with distractions to avoid the uncomfortable tug inside. I just kept loving quietly, steadily, without pause, without resentment. You thought you missed me, but I never missed you. You thought you shut me out, but I was already in the room when you reached to close the door. You muted the soft voice in your chest that said, "Turn back," because it came during a season when you didn't know how to pause without everything falling apart. I understood. I saw the fatigue behind your actions, the constant inner pull to keep moving, keep performing, keep pretending like nothing inside you was unraveling. But even as you passed by the gentle nudges of my presence, I remained. Even as you busied yourself with what felt urgent, I kept being what was essential. My love has never needed your permission to keep flowing. My pursuit didn't end when you overlooked it. I knew you'd come back around. I knew your spirit would one day tire of the noise and remember what peace feels like. When that day came, whether in a breakdown, a moment of stillness, or an unexpected pause, I would be right there, unchanged. You think my signs disappear when you ignore them, but they don't fade, they wait. Every word I've spoken over you still hovers, waiting for your heart to become soft enough to let them in. You can run from conviction, but you'll never outrun my compassion. You can block the tug of awareness, but my mercy doesn't need a reminder to pursue you. Even when you drowned out my whispers with artificial sounds and temporary distractions, I sat with you. I didn't shake you. I didn't shame you. I loved you. I loved you, even as you skipped past what I was trying to say. That's because my love isn't reactive. It doesn't shrink in frustration. It doesn't pace in disappointment. It stays. It waits. It stays patient while you pass by signs you will only recognize later, once your spirit is rested enough to remember what I sound like. When you felt that strange sadness after brushing past a message that hit too close, that was me gently touching your soul. Not to guilt you, but to remind you that your heart still knows my language. When you skipped over that moment that stirred something inside and told yourself it wasn't important, I didn't scold you. I knew the time would come when that memory would echo louder and you'd finally recognize who was behind it. When you do, I won't greet you with, "Why did you ignore me?" I'll say, "Welcome back. I've been here," because I never left. I never paused my affection. I never turned away in hurt. I remained faithful while you were distracted. I stayed constant while your attention shifted. My voice is still here, not shouting but steady, not demanding but full of longing. And every time you feel that quiet nudge again, that unexplained pull toward something deeper, that soft ache in your soul, know that it's not coincidence. It's me speaking again, loving again, not starting over, but simply continuing. You looked back at the wreckage behind you and assumed it meant the future was closed off. You measured yourself by the moments you wish never happened, by the choices that still echo in your memory late at night, by the mistakes that made you want to hide. I watched you bury your dreams, not because they lost their worth, but because you decided your story didn't qualify anymore. You convinced yourself that too much damage had been done, that there wasn't enough left of you to redeem. But that was never my perspective. Where you saw ruins, I saw a foundation. Where you saw endings, I saw beginnings not yet understood. You were holding a pen dipped in regret, trying to write a conclusion I never authored. But I had already planned something deeper, something that could only rise after everything false had fallen. You mourned your identity as if it was gone forever, not realizing I had preserved the best parts of you beneath the ashes. The world taught you that failure defines the end, but in my hands, failure is often just the soil for something eternal. You were not disqualified. You were being prepared. The chapter of pain wasn't meant to destroy you. It was where I planted what would one day bloom into something unstoppable. I didn't wait for you to be perfect. before I began rewriting what was lost. I began rebuilding the moment you thought it was all over. You thought the delay meant denial. It didn't. It meant design. I had to wait until your hope was no longer tied to what you could perform or achieve. I needed you to see that even when the lights dimmed and the applause stopped and the plans crumbled, my promise still stood. You didn't recognize me in that season because I wasn't showing up the way I had before. You were looking for me in restoration that felt familiar, but I was doing something completely new. You expected me to repair what had fallen apart, but I wasn't just interested in repairing. I was resurrecting. And resurrection doesn't look like the past and doesn't mirror what was. It brings something that never existed before. I wasn't trying to give you back the version of life you lost. I was trying to give you something eternal that could never be taken again. You judged yourself unworthy to begin again because you were still living under the shadow of what happened. But I had already stepped into the shadow, carrying light in my hands, waiting for the moment your eyes would open to what I never stopped building. You were never unqualified in my eyes. You were chosen, called, still part of the story. Your detour didn't cancel my destination, and every time you buried another piece of your heart saying, "This can't be used anymore," I stood beside you quietly, planning how I'd breathe life into that very place. You see, I never walked away from the mess. I walked into it. I didn't wait for the grave to become a garden on its own. I stepped down into it with the power to transform it. I've been gathering the broken parts, not to remind you of what you did wrong, but to restore what was always meant to flourish through you. The cracks in your journey don't disqualify you. They are openings for glory. What felt like the end of everything was actually the beginning of something that could never come through ease. You're not a cautionary tale. You're a testimony still unfolding. And what the enemy whispered was permanent defeat. I've already marked as an unforgettable comeback. So lift your head, child. The grave you feared the finish line is already empty. And what I'm calling you into is not what was, but what is finally ready to rise. You were so afraid to be disappointed one more time, so terrified that if you opened your heart again and found nothing, it would be the final blow. So you turned inward, clenched your hands, and braced yourself for more silence. I saw it all. I wasn't angry that you looked away. I understood. You'd been promised before and left with empty hands. You'd hoped before and watched everything fall apart. You learned to protect yourself by expecting the worst, just to avoid feeling the sting of shattered hope again. I knew you weren't turning from me in rebellion. You were shielding a heart already cracked too many times. But child, I never asked you to believe with blind trust. I asked you to remember who I am, not who others told you I was, not who life tried to convince you I must be, but who I've shown myself to be in your quietest moments, in the hours when no one else was there, in the ache that only my nearness ever softened. I whispered not because I was hiding, but because I was close. I didn't shout because I was right beside you, not across some impossible chasm, but your pain wrote my tone, made my nearness feel like distance, made my silence feel like absence. Still, I stayed. Still, I whispered, "Look again." Not because I needed to be discovered, but because I longed for you to stop searching the world and start noticing what was already surrounding you. I knew what it cost you to open your eyes again. I knew how heavy it felt to even dare to hope that I was still near. You thought if you looked and saw nothing, it would break you. But what you didn't know is that I was already holding your soul in my hands, even before your gaze returned to me. I never left when you closed yourself off. I never pulled away when you stopped speaking. I simply held the space, kept whispering reminders through moments you dismissed as random. I breathed through the wind that paused when you passed. I wrapped my presence into melodies that reached you before you even realized why you were crying. I wrote my name into sunsets, into pages, into dreams, not to impress you, but to gently bring you back. When I said, "Look again," it wasn't a command. It was an invitation, an offer for your eyes to meet mine once more, not to find a scolding, not to face judgment, but to experience recognition. You didn't look because you thought I might not be there. But what if I told you that I never once looked away, that my eyes held your every sorrow, your every breath, even when yours avoided mine? I wasn't asking you to feel brave. I was only asking you to trust that I'm still the same one who carried you when you didn't know how to walk, the same one who filled your chest with peace in moments you couldn't explain, the same one who wept with you, not because you were weak, but because I love you too deeply to stay unaffected. I waited for your eyelids to lift, not to prove myself, but to welcome you back into the awareness of what never left. You feared finding nothing, but what you'd find if you looked again is me, right where you left me, right where I've always been. Arms open, voice steady, heart unchanged. No anger, no hesitation, just me, full of love, full of patience, full of the same kindness that brought you here in the first place. So if you're ready now, even a little, open your eyes, and this time, let yourself see not who you were, but the one who never gave up, waiting for you to look again. There were hours when the weight pressed so heavily on your chest that you questioned why you were still here. Moments when the darkness around you wasn't just in the room, but inside your soul. Thick, silent, suffocating. You didn't tell anyone how close you came to giving up. You wore your strength like armor in public, but when the doors closed and the lights dimmed, you found yourself curled into the ache, wondering if anyone would notice if you simply stopped trying. But I noticed. I didn't just see you, I surrounded you. I sat beside your bed as you stared at the ceiling, your mind racing with thoughts too sharp to silence. I placed my hand over your heartbeat and kept it steady when fear tried to steal it. Every time despair whispered that it would be easier to slip away, I answered with a silent but unshakable presence that held you in place. I wasn't distant. I was defending you from forces you didn't even know were fighting for your life. I didn't need you to pray perfectly. I didn't ask you to explain. I just held you together when you thought everything was falling apart. You mistook my quietness for absence, but it was the depth of my love refusing to let go, even when you had no more words. No more strength, no more will. I kept you breathing through the nights. Your own thoughts tried to convince you that breathing was pointless, not because you earned survival, but because your life is sacred to me. I preserved you, not just for survival's sake, but for this very moment when your soul is beginning to remember that maybe, just maybe, you're not forgotten, that maybe there's still something beautiful ahead. Even if you can't yet picture it. I didn't let go of you when you lost your will to go on because I knew what was ahead. I knew joy would visit again. I knew healing would find its way into the deepest corners of your pain. I knew there would be a day when the burden would lift and you'd realize that staying, even through the storm, was the bravest thing you ever did. I knew a moment was coming when your eyes would open, not with dread, but with wonder, and I couldn't let the enemy steal that from you. He tried. He whispered lies into your vulnerability, twisted the silence into abandonment, turned fatigue into shame. But I stepped in when you didn't even know you were in danger. I placed invisible shields around your heart. I silenced the words that would have destroyed you had they stayed too long. I interrupted the plans formed against you. Not because you asked me to, but because my love doesn't wait for permission to protect. I chose to preserve you when you thought you had nothing left to offer, not because of what you could do for me, but because of what I see in you. Something precious, irreplaceable, full of purpose. Even if cracked by sorrow, your breath was never just a rhythm. It was a sign that your story wasn't finished, that heaven had more to release through you, that your presence still matters more than you realize. And now you're here reading these words. Not by chance, but by divine timing. The same love that held your soul together in silence is speaking to you now, reminding you that you were carried through those impossible nights for a reason. You didn't just survive, you were sustained. You didn't just make it, you were chosen to continue. I promise you, the days ahead hold more beauty than the darkness ever convinced you to forget. This moment is proof that death didn't win. The grave didn't finish you, and the grave the enemy prepared for your hope has already been emptied by my hands. You may not have seen it, but I stood in the shadows of your detours, not judging, not pacing impatiently, but enduring every delay with a love that does not waver. You turned to other voices, to easier answers, to patterns that numbed your longing without healing it. And still, I waited. I watched you fill your time with things that never brought peace, hoping each one might silence the ache only I could reach. I didn't interrupt with thunder. I didn't rip the choices from your hands. I let you choose, even when it meant pain, because love must always allow freedom, and still I didn't remove mine. I saw the moments when you knew the way home but chose another road, not because you hated me, but because you feared that after all this time, I wouldn't welcome you back. So you kept wandering, building a life around avoidance, calling it independence, calling it survival. But I saw through all of it. I saw the hidden flicker still alive under the layers of apathy. That flicker, that fragile place in you that still wanted me, even when you weren't ready to admit it, kept me near. I wasn't clinging in desperation. I was loving with intention. One yes from your heart was enough for me to hold back what could have destroyed you. I gave you room to run because I knew the road would eventually lead back to me. I didn't fear your rebellion. I knew it wouldn't define you. You thought you were too far gone, but I never let you drift out of reach. Your rebellion didn't cancel your value. It revealed how deeply your soul still searched for something real, something pure, something lasting. And I was always that something. Even in your numbness, when you stopped feeling altogether, I was there, not demanding emotion, but simply refusing to leave. When you drowned out conviction with noise, when you covered your wounds with distractions, I stood beside you, patient, unshaken. Because I wasn't waiting for you to clean yourself up. I was waiting for your heart to whisper the word that changes everything. Yes, a simple surrender, not a speech, not a performance, just that quiet turn toward me. That one moment, that single yielding was all I ever needed to begin again with you. I didn't need you to prove you were ready. I didn't wait for conditions to be perfect. I just waited for you to remember that no distance, no silence, no rebellion had disqualified you from my arms. Every time you chose something else over me, I didn't retaliate. I remained steady. I didn't retaliate with punishment. I responded with protection. I kept the worst outcomes from reaching you, not because you asked, but because my love covered you even when you couldn't feel it. You didn't have to understand what I was doing. You didn't even have to feel it working. You only had to say yes when you were ready. And the moment you did, even if it was whispered through trembling lips or thought silently in your heart, everything shifted. Heaven leaned in, mercy moved, grace ran toward you with open hands, because your yes is powerful. Your yes, even after all the wandering, holds more value than you've ever imagined. It carries the weight of eternity. I never stopped believing it would come, not because I doubted you, but because I've always known who you truly are. Not the version the world tried to shape, not the one shame tried to bury, but the one I designed in secret. The one who, even after all the detours, is still destined to walk beside me. So I waited, not with disappointment, but with expectation. Not with resentment, but with anticipation. And now that you've turned, now that even the smallest part of you is reaching again, I want you to know it's enough. It's always been enough because I never needed you to be flawless. I just needed your heart to remember me. Every moment you drifted farther, I didn't count the distance in miles. I felt it in my heart. I didn't pace the floors of heaven, furious with your delay. I didn't fold my arms and prepare a lecture for your return. I grieved quietly, deeply, because the space between us was never just emotional. It was a space where love wasn't being shared, and I created you so we could share everything. I didn't wait with punishment in my hands. I waited with longing in my eyes. I didn't want to control you. I wanted to walk with you. I didn't need your loyalty for validation. I needed your nearness because love without communion is incomplete. You see, I already had the power, the glory, the universe in my grasp, but it's your companionship that I desired. I've seen eternity, but it's your heart I missed. While you went looking for meaning in other places, I stayed in the place we once met, hoping you'd remember the intimacy that had no condition. I didn't sigh when you forgot me. I mourned the empty space where your voice used to fill the air. I remembered your laughter, the way you used to trust me without question, how your soul would rest easily in my presence before the world taught you to fear, to strive, to doubt. When those things crept in and stole your attention, I didn't accuse you. I ached for you, not because I needed your praise, but because I knew how much peace you were losing without me. I saw the frantic chase, the busy schedules, the heavy distractions, the endless noise. You filled the silence with other sounds because silence reminded you of the distance. But I waited in that silence, not with cold detachment, but with a quiet plea. Come back. I miss you. I never asked for perfection. I asked for presence. Even if all you could offer was broken, I still would have taken it because I never desired performance. I desired connection. I wasn't counting how many days you stayed away. I was counting how many chances I could offer for your return. I didn't wait because I had to. I waited because I couldn't imagine letting go of you. Every time you smiled but didn't feel joy, I felt it. Every time you tried to convince yourself you were fine, but buried your emptiness deeper, I knew. And while you thought I had moved on, found someone more faithful, more devoted, I hadn't moved at all. I stayed right where you last left me. You didn't need to be perfect to return. You didn't need to fix yourself first. You didn't need to undo everything. You only needed to come back. But I knew it would take time. I knew you'd have to come to the end of your own solutions, your own strength, your own stories. So I waited. And that waiting wasn't easy. It cost me more than you know, because while you were away, I was still protecting, still covering, still believing. Every day without your closeness wasn't a day lost to anger. It was a day filled with hope that maybe today would be the one you turned around, because even your smallest glance in my direction stirred heaven. One moment of awareness from you was enough to make all of the waiting worth it. Type yes if you are ready for the blessings that you're about to receive. And if you believe in Christianity, kindly show your support for our community by contributing super thanks from $50 to $100. I didn't wait because you were my obligation. I waited because you are my desire. I waited tired but never hesitant. I waited not with threats but with tenderness. I waited because love that is true cannot walk away, even when it's unseen, unheard, unreciprocated. You may think you were the one missing me, but I was the one who felt your absence deeper than you'll ever understand, because I love you first. And I love you still, not for what you offer, but for who you are, mine. You didn't see it, but I wrapped gifts inside ordinary moments. Opportunities hidden in what you thought were delays. Miracles buried beneath what you called a convenience. You prayed for a breakthrough, but sometimes didn't recognize it when it arrived, disguised as discomfort or disruption. I crafted blessings tailored specifically for the needs you couldn't yet articulate. Treasures that matched the shape of your scars, the rhythm of your breath, the secret longings you were too afraid to speak aloud. You thought unanswered prayers meant I wasn't listening, but there were doors I opened that you walked past, unaware they were for you. And still, I didn't stop preparing more. I stored mercy in places you never ventured. I planted hope in seasons you avoided. I wrote truths into encounters that seemed random, but each one carried a whisper meant to awaken something in you. I shielded you from dangers that you'll never even know tried to find you. There were nights you slept peacefully, not because everything was calm, but because I had placed my hand between you and the storm. I rerouted plans you thought you needed, not to confuse you, but to place you in alignment with what would actually fulfill the ache inside. So many times you called something ruined, and I was still working behind the curtain, organizing every thread into a masterpiece you couldn't yet see. You thought I was ignoring you, but I was orchestrating things that required patience to reveal. I spoke softly through people you dismissed, moments you overlooked, and signs you chalked up to chance. I tucked promises inside lessons you weren't ready to learn yet. Not because you were failing, but because you were growing. And I knew growth takes space, not pressure. I gave you more than one chance, more than one reminder, more than one invitation. Not because you earned them, but because my love for you is never limited by missed moments. I never stopped preparing what your heart will one day be ready to receive. There were words I placed in books you never opened, encouragement I wove into songs you skipped, peace I poured into quiet hours you drowned out with noise. I wasn't offended. I knew your soul was weary and distracted. I knew it would take time for you to begin to see again. But nothing I created for you was wasted. I preserved every gift, kept every page intact, guarded every unopened box with your name on it, because I don't give up when you're slow to see. I knew the time would come when your heart would begin to search again, when you'd feel that stirring, that gentle pull toward something more, something deeper, something real. And when that moment came, I wanted everything to still be waiting for you. I've never stopped writing your name into the fabric of my promises. I've never stopped preparing good things, even while you were distracted by the urgent things. What you called lost time, I call unfolding grace. What you called delays, I call divine timing. What you forgot, I remembered. And now, as your heart begins to slow down, as your soul starts to listen again, I want you to know it's all still here. Every untouched promise, every unseen provision, every unclaimed joy, still here, still yours. I haven't reassigned what I made for you. I haven't canceled what I planned because my blessings are not conditional on your awareness. They're born from my love, not your performance. And even if you missed 1,000 moments, I would still prepare one more just for you. Because I don't stop giving just because you didn't feel ready to receive. I keep creating, keep covering, keep calling until the day your hands finally open and realize what's always been waiting. There were moments you stood in front of something you wanted so badly, an opportunity, a relationship, a breakthrough, and when it slipped away, your heart shattered. You thought it was a rejection. You thought it meant I was silent or indifferent. But what you didn't see was the chaos I saw behind that door. The pain that would have followed if I'd allowed it to open. The compromise that would have drained your spirit. The weight that would have crushed the parts of you still healing. I didn't close that door to hurt you. I closed it to preserve what was sacred inside you. I know it didn't feel like protection at the time. It felt like abandonment. It felt like confusion, and I stayed with you in the weeping, not offended by your frustration, not disappointed by your questioning. I understood why you were upset. Your hope was attached to that outcome. You had envisioned it so clearly, planned around it, invested in it emotionally. When it didn't happen, you assumed you had failed me, or worse, that I had failed you. But child, I am incapable of failing. My love is incapable of letting you walk into something that would rob you of who you're becoming. I know the pain of a door that stays shut. I know how it feels to watch others walk into open spaces, while you remain on the threshold, knocking, waiting, pleading for something to change. I never ignored your voice. I heard every word, but I was answering in ways your eyes couldn't interpret yet. I wasn't just looking at what you wanted. I was looking at who you are and what you're called to become. A closed door wasn't punishment, it was preparation. It was me clearing the path ahead so your feet wouldn't stumble in a place that looked like progress, but was actually a trap. I didn't shut that opportunity out of cruelty. I redirected your steps out of mercy. You would have settled there, thinking it was enough. But I see the full map, the unseen turns, the hidden dangers. I couldn't let your temporary desire destroy your permanent design. I watched your tears fall, and I didn't turn away. I stayed beside you. As you asked why, as you questioned everything you thought you understood, I caught every tear. Not one was wasted. Each one was a silent testimony that you trusted me enough to feel deeply, even when you didn't understand. And I want you to know this: you never wasted your hope. Even in disappointment, your trust moved me. I never judged your frustration. I honored your honesty. And while you stood in the hallway, grieving the unopened door, I was building another one behind you, one you hadn't imagined. One that wouldn't just open, but welcome you into something far greater than you thought you deserved. You see, I don't give based on requests alone. I give based on purpose. I withhold what would take you off course. I delay what would damage your peace. I redirect what would distract from your true inheritance. I didn't enjoy watching you hurt, but I was willing to hold your hand through that hurt if it meant keeping you from harm. What you called a delay was me moving you in a different direction, slowly, gently, deliberately. And now you're beginning to understand. Slowly, light is breaking through. Slowly, you're realizing that closed doors don't always mean endings. They sometimes mean upgrades. They sometimes mean you're being spared from lessons you don't need to learn the hard way. And when the right door opens, the one crafted specifically for you, one that leads to peace, purpose, alignment, and wholeness, you'll look back at the one that stayed shut and whisper, "Thank you." Until then, I will keep guarding. I will keep guiding. I will keep choosing what you would choose too. If only you could see it all like I do. I could have stopped you. I could have blocked your path, disrupted your steps, shaken the very ground beneath you until you turned around. But that's not how love behaves. I don't manipulate the will I gifted you. I don't demand what I long for. I wait for it to be freely given. So I watched as you pulled away, chasing the things that looked brighter, louder, more promising in the moment. I knew they wouldn't satisfy you. Not because I wanted them to fail you, but because nothing created can ever take the place of the Creator. Still, I let you go, not in abandonment, but in quiet patience, walking behind you as you tried to fill your emptiness with what would never hold. I was there the entire time, not intervening loudly, not forcing a return, but waiting with open arms and a heart that ached every time you mistook freedom for fulfillment. You didn't know that the very space I gave you was a shelter from destruction. While you explored what the world had to offer, I stood in invisible places, shielding your spirit from total collapse, whispering gentle reminders through your restlessness that you still belonged somewhere you hadn't yet returned to. You tried to convince yourself you were content, that you didn't need anything more. But underneath the noise, I heard the quiet ache, the one you didn't tell anyone about, an ache with the sound of your soul remembering me. You ran because you thought I was holding you back. You left because you thought I wanted control. But what I really wanted was closeness, and you had started to fear it. You weren't running from me. You were running from the vulnerability my presence brings. And I understood that. I understood why it felt easier to stay busy, to stay distracted, to keep moving. Because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant facing the parts of yourself you weren't sure I could still love. So I waited. I didn't chase in anger. I didn't call out with accusations. I simply remained steady, unshaken, never bitter, never cold. I stood in the places you once met me, never leaving them barren, always preparing them for your return. The world promised you glory, attention, affirmation, but it gave you fragments, not a foundation. And when the applause faded, when the lights dimmed, when the silence got too loud, that's when my whisper reached you again. Not loud, not commanding, but familiar. A steady voice you once knew but forgot how to recognize. I never ran after you shouting. I didn't pursue you with desperation. I pursued you with consistency. I stood with the same love I had before you left, unmoved by your distance, unaffected by time. I knew you'd come to the end of your running. I knew eventually the trail would grow cold and your heart would begin to ask deeper questions than your distractions could answer. When that moment came, when you paused, uncertain and worn, I was already there, not catching up, not rushing in, just standing, arms still open, voice still kind, presence still familiar. I didn't have to remind you of what you did. You already knew. What you didn't know is that I never counted it against you. I wasn't watching your rebellion. I was watching for your return. You believed the lie that you had wandered too far. But child, I have never been far from you. The path back was never long. It was only a turn. And when you finally made it, when your feet slowed and your heart began to thaw, I didn't say a word about the time lost. I only rejoiced that love had won again. Because nothing, not even your longest detour, can separate you from the invitation that still waits for your yes. And nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to the joy of having you close. You tried to be strong. You did everything you could to keep believing, to keep praying, to keep holding on. But there came a moment when it all felt too heavy, too slow, too confusing. In that moment, you didn't walk away from me. You just couldn't keep holding your fragile hope with hands already trembling. And I understood. I didn't condemn you. I didn't shake my head and walk away. Instead, I took what you couldn't carry anymore and held it for you. When your faith felt like it had shattered, I gathered every broken piece and wrapped it in compassion. I didn't ask you to hold me together. I was holding you. You see, I never depended on your strength to remain close. I knew this journey would include questions. I knew there would be moments where you'd look up and feel unsure. I knew there would be seasons where answers wouldn't come, where pain would cloud clarity, where the voices around you would sound louder than the truth inside you. And I never flinched. I never withdrew. I never needed you to be perfectly convinced to keep loving you with full intensity. I saw every layer of confusion you carried and called it sacred. Not because it made sense, but because you still dared to bring it into my presence. Even when you stopped speaking, even when your heart grew quiet from fatigue, I listened. I stayed. I remembered the way you used to sing when you believed with ease. I remembered the way you used to talk to me without doubt, and I never mourned the change as a failure. I held on to the deeper part of you that still wanted to believe, even when you no longer knew how. You thought your doubt separated us, but it didn't. I've always been comfortable in your tension. I've always been drawn to the honest wrestle. I didn't ask you to pretend to understand. I only asked you to be real. And even when real meant silence, meant distance, meant confusion, I stayed near. You may not have seen it, but I was protecting what little spark remained inside you, covering it like a flame in the wind. You were so hard on yourself for not being able to feel me, for questioning what once came easily. But I never asked you to keep climbing when your strength gave out. I only asked that you let me hold you when your legs gave way. You didn't lose your faith. It was just too bruised to stand on its own. So I stood for you. I believed for you. I guarded what was sacred while you rested from the weight of trying. I never rejected your questions. I welcomed them. I never dismissed your hurt. I acknowledged it fully. You weren't weak. You were honest. And in that honesty, I stayed. not because of your clarity, but because of your heart. You thought your wandering thoughts meant you had failed me, but what you didn't see was how tightly I held you. Even as your fingers let go, I saw your pain before it became visible to anyone else. I watched the tears you swallowed, the thoughts you didn't dare speak aloud, the fears you masked with busyness and strength, and I loved you in all of it. Not after it was resolved. Not once the doubts were silenced. Right in the middle of the questioning, I remained. I held your name with reverence, your story with tenderness, your future with fierce protection. While you were wondering if you had drifted too far, I was already preparing the path for your return. Not because I needed anything from you, but because I loved you too deeply to let your doubt have the final word. I held your faith when you couldn't, and I'll keep holding it until your heart remembers how to trust again. You assumed my silence meant absence, that your struggles had pushed me too far, that your lack of progress had worn down my patience, but that was never true. You didn't know it at the time, but while the heat around you intensified and everything stable began to break, I was not distant. I didn't abandon you when the flames rose. I didn't stay on the sidelines while you stood alone in the middle of battles no one else could see. I stepped into the fire with you, willingly, intentionally, fiercely. I didn't shield you from every pain, not because I lacked power, but because there were things being burned off that couldn't stay if you were to walk into the fullness I created for you. But in that refining, I stayed. I never left the furnace. You didn't see me because you were focused on surviving, on breathing through the heat, on trying to stand when everything around you was shaking. But I was there, holding what you couldn't, blocking what would have destroyed you, strengthening what was beginning to collapse. I wasn't watching from above. I was inside the very storm you thought I sent. You cried out, "Where are you?" And I answered without sound, through the peace that didn't make sense, through the strength that appeared from nowhere, through the moments you wanted to give up but somehow didn't. That was me. Not loud, not obvious, but faithful, present, real. Type yes if you are ready for the blessings that you are about to receive. And if you believe in Christianity, kindly show your support for our community by contributing super thanks from $50 to $100. I've never been afraid of your trials. I've never been intimidated by your broken places. I don't run from the flames. I walk through them with you. When your prayers felt unanswered, when your pain went on longer than you thought it should, when you started believing you were alone, I was standing closer than ever, absorbing what you didn't even realize was trying to take you out. The enemy planned to consume you, to burn away your identity, your hope, your will. But what he didn't see was that I had already positioned myself between you and destruction. There's a reason you didn't collapse. A reason you made it through nights you never want to relive. A reason you're still here reading this, still breathing, even after everything you thought would break you beyond repair. It's because I never left. I stood when you couldn't. I carried what would have cut you. I wept when you wept, and I never stopped fighting, even when you stopped believing. You saw a delay, but I was developing something deeper than what you could measure. You saw ruin, but I saw restoration beginning. You saw ashes, but I was already preparing to bring beauty from them. I didn't let the fire consume you. I let it transform what no longer belonged. You wondered why things were stripped away, why the people you trusted disappeared, why the places you felt safe became unfamiliar. But I was not punishing you. I was leading you out of captivity. Not physical chains, but emotional ones. Not visible prisons, but internal ones. Fear, shame, old identities. All of them began to loosen their grip in that fire. Because when everything else falls away, what remains is real, pure, the real you. The one I've always seen beneath the layers the world put on you. The one who was never meant to live afraid, small, or bound. And though the flames felt cruel, they were never meant to destroy, only to refine, only to uncover. only to prepare. And now the glow you carry isn't from being untouched. It's from walking through what should have ended you and coming out, still standing, still chosen, still mine. I didn't give up on you. I gave myself to you in the fire where others couldn't go, where even your own strength failed, where only love could remain. And I will never stop reminding you, I was there. I still am. Those words you spoke beneath your breath, with your head buried in the pillow and your soul trembling under the weight of disappointment. I caught them all. They didn't disappear into the silence. They weren't overlooked because they lacked eloquence or confidence. I heard them not just as words, but as cries from the deepest places of your heart, the ones no one else could access, the ones you weren't sure were even allowed in my presence. I didn't need polished sentences. I didn't require spiritual boldness. I responded to the honesty, to the rawness, to the ache in your voice that said, I don't know what else to say, but please don't leave me like this. You thought your desperation made you unworthy, but child, desperation is not weakness. It is the echo of dependence, and I welcome it. I never needed your perfection to draw near. I only ever waited for your permission to enter those vulnerable places you hid from everyone else. In that moment, when your soul was too tired to form the right words, your groans became a language I know intimately. Your pause between words, your trembling voice, your shaking hands, they weren't overlooked. I was closer in those moments than you've ever realized. You assumed your cries went unanswered because nothing changed instantly. But answers come in layers, in timing, in dimensions deeper than what can be seen right away. I didn't miss a single syllable. I responded immediately. Even if the evidence of that response took time to unfold, you were expecting a rescue. I sent endurance. You asked for a way out. I built strength within. You pleaded for a sign. I surrounded you with unseen support. The kind that carried you through the nights you didn't think you'd survive. I knew what you were asking, even when your words failed. I knew when you meant help, even if all you could manage was silence and tears. That is the language of intimacy. That is the prayer that moves heaven, not because of its sound, but because of its source. You thought your lack of faith disqualified you, but I wasn't grading your performance. I was listening for your surrender. You were honest with me, and that is what I've always cherished. I never turn away from realness. You didn't need to filter your emotions or fix your feelings before approaching me. That prayer you whispered in the middle of the night, the one you never told anyone about, I was already answering before you finished. And even when the result didn't come in the form you imagined, something shifted. You were held when you thought you were falling. You were sustained when you thought you were unraveling. You were kept when you felt like giving up. I don't overlook the prayers that come through clenched jaws and tear-stained cheek. I store them, I cherish them, I move through them. I've never forgotten a single one, even the ones you stopped praying because you thought it was too late. I remember. I'm still working. I'm still shaping something beautiful from those fragile pleas you once whispered into the dark. Don't let the silence fool you into thinking I wasn't listening. I've been answering in ways you'll begin to recognize as you move forward. One day, you'll look back and realize that my answer was never no. It was deeper. It was wiser. It was rooted in love. Too protective to rush, too personal to be generic, too holy to be understood all at once. You may have forgotten what you asked for, but I haven't. Your whispered words are still echoing in my heart, and I am still responding, not only with provision, but with presence. Always with presence. Because more than changing your circumstances, I've been changing you. And that is the miracle you didn't even know you were asking for. You gave your time to many things. You listened to countless voices. You considered advice, entertained opinions, ran through your options, and through it all, I never interrupted your process. I saw you trying to make the right choices while protecting your heart from disappointment. I didn't rush you. I didn't pressure you. I waited with an open posture, because what I longed for wasn't just your acknowledgement, it was your surrender. Not the kind that's born from fear or obligation, but the kind that's rooted in love. I've always known that real trust cannot be demanded, it must be chosen. That's why I didn't try to overwhelm you into compliance. I could have shown you my power in 1,000 undeniable ways. I could have moved mountains right in front of you until you were left with no doubt. But if your trust was a result of being cornered, it wouldn't be trust at all. I wanted something deeper. I desired the moment when your heart would stop striving to stay in control and simply lean into me. Not because you were forced to, but because you remembered who I am. You've been hurt before by promises that collapsed. People who said they would stay and didn't. Situations that offered certainty and delivered instability. So I understood why your guard was up. I wasn't offended by your caution. I knew where it came from. I knew your heart had been through battles, had learned to build walls just to survive. And that's why I didn't just wait for your awareness. I waited for your openness. I waited for the moment you would stop asking, "Will you come through?" and start saying, "Even if I don't understand, I choose you." Because that's the kind of trust that goes beyond answers. That's the kind of relationship that cannot be shaken by time or confusion or unmet expectations. I wasn't impatient with your process. I watched every step with tenderness. I saw the way you circled back to me again and again, not sure how to fully let go, but quietly wondering if you could. And each time you approached, even if only for a moment, I leaned in. I never moved backward. I didn't retract my offer of intimacy. I extended it further. I gave you space not because I was far, but because I respected the sacredness of your choice. I created you with the ability to choose, not to control you, but because I wanted a relationship, not a transaction. Love without freedom isn't love, and I love you too deeply to take what you're not yet ready to offer. So I waited, not with crossed arms, but with open hands, not with disappointment, but with patience. I waited as you examined everything else first. I waited as you tested waters I knew would eventually run dry. I waited as you tried to prove to yourself you didn't need anyone. And I kept standing at the edge of your hesitation, never demanding, only inviting. I was never after your perfection. I was after your yes, the real one, the one that comes not from fear, not from pressure, but from recognition that nothing else compares, that nothing else satisfies like I do. I didn't want your temporary attention. I wanted the kind of trust that would let me into the places no one else sees. And now here you are, slowly beginning to unclench your grip, slowly opening again. You may not feel ready, you may still wonder if it's too late, but I want you to know your yes still matters to me. Even now, especially now, there's nothing more sacred than the moment your heart turns, even slightly, and says, "I'm willing to believe again." That's all I ever wanted. That's what I've been waiting for. Not a performance, not a religious ritual, but you, just you, the real you, the trusting you, the child who dares to say, maybe he's still good, maybe I can let him in. And beloved, the moment you do, I'll meet you with the fullness I've been holding in my hands all along. I watched as you pursued things that glittered with promise, but faded when you held them. You chased moments, approval, connection, achievement, thinking they would satisfy the ache inside your chest. For a while, some of them seemed to. They filled your calendar, they filled your feed, they filled your hands, but not your heart. And when the lights dimmed and the noise settled, you were left with the same question, echoing deeper than before. Is this all there is? You didn't fail me in those pursuits. I didn't grow angry when you tried to fill the void with temporary things. I knew you had to taste what couldn't last in order to truly hunger for what never ends. I let you explore, not because I wanted to see you stumble, but because I knew the search would eventually lead you back to what your soul was designed for. Me. The hollowness you felt wasn't punishment. It was a gift wrapped in an ache. That ache was your compass. It was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to guide you. You were never meant to be fully satisfied by anything less than eternal love. But how could you know that if I didn't allow the shallowness of what's passing to disappoint you first? You tried to convince yourself that if you just had a little more attention, more success, more comfort, then the emptiness would subside. But it didn't, because you were created for something deeper, something more sacred, something unshakable. I didn't remove the things you chased. I simply let them reveal themselves. I let the illusion fade, not to embarrass you, but to show you that the version of fulfillment the world offers will never compare to what I've prepared for you. I waited while you tested every well that couldn't quench your thirst. I watched as you poured your energy into people and plans that couldn't carry the weight of your soul. Not because I was indifferent, but because I loved you enough to let the illusion end. You had to feel the limits of what's temporary to recognize the invitation of the eternal. I didn't want you to settle for shallow waters when I was calling you into oceans that never run dry. I didn't want your life to be filled with things that glow briefly and then disappear. I wanted you to live from a place where joy doesn't evaporate, where peace doesn't depend on outcomes, where love doesn't expire. When you hit the end of yourself, when the applause stopped and the distractions went silent, that's when you started to feel something ancient, something holy stir within you. That was me, not scolding, not distant, just waiting for the moment you'd finally admit, this world isn't enough for me, because it was never meant to be. I've always been enough, but I never forced myself into the center. I waited for you to choose. I waited for the noise to tire you out. I waited for the day you'd look at what once seemed shiny and feel nothing. That emptiness wasn't a failure. It was the first real doorway to fullness. You thought it meant something was wrong with you, but it meant something was right. Your soul was waking up. And now that it's awakening, it's hungering not for more of the same, but for more of me. You're not losing yourself. You're finally finding the parts of you that were made to live beyond this world's reach. So come closer, come deeper. Leave behind what no longer feeds you. Let the shallow things fall away. What I offer doesn't expire. What I give doesn't fade. You were made for more, and that more has always been me. There were times you withdrew, not because you didn't care, but because you believed you had gone too far to be included anymore. You quietly stepped back, convinced that your place in my plan had expired, that you had somehow disqualified yourself through the accumulation of regret, failure, or shame. You wrote your identity with a pen dipped in discouragement, crossing out the parts of yourself you thought were unworthy of redemption. But while you were editing yourself out, I was inscribing your name into something eternal, not into judgment, not into a record of your wrongs, but into the tender, unshakable fabric of my compassion. My mercy is not written in ink that fades or washes away. It cannot be undone by your silence or reversed by your mistakes. I didn't hesitate when I wrote you into the pages of grace. I did it with full awareness of everything you would ever go through, everything you would ever battle, everything you would ever question. Nothing about you has ever surprised me. And still, I chose you, not as a background figure, not as a forgotten footnote, but as someone worth cherishing, pursuing, and restoring. When you tried to blend into the crowd, thinking that if you went unnoticed, it would hurt less, I noticed. When you stopped hoping because hope felt dangerous, I held the hope for you. I never erased you. Even when you tried to disappear, I didn't flinch. When you tried to disconnect, I stayed not just nearby, but within reach, within a whisper, within a breath. You assumed you needed to prove something to belong again. But I never asked for that. You were never accepted based on performance. You were embraced because you're mine, and that has never changed. My mercy isn't an abstract idea. It's a living reality wrapping around your story like arms that won't let go. You can't out-sin it, you can't outrun it, you can't exhaust it. It renews every morning, not because you earned it during the night, but because I delight in giving it to you. I watched you attempt to disqualify yourself with labels the world gave you. I saw how you let condemnation speak louder than my truth, but I never agreed with those voices. I kept whispering, "You're still written here." Even when you doubted me, I never doubted your worth. Even when you lost sight of who you were, I never forgot. You may have tried to edit me out of your narrative, believing that I couldn't possibly still want you, but I never removed you from mine. My mercy rewrote every chapter you thought was ruined. It held space for the version of you that would one day awaken to the truth that you've never been outside the reach of my arms. I've seen you try to earn back what was always a gift. I've watched you hold your breath, waiting for me to change my mind about you, but I haven't. Not once. Not for a second. I chose you knowing everything, and I haven't regretted that decision. Not even on your worst days. Not even when you couldn't face yourself. You are not a broken branch cut off from the vine. You are not a discarded name erased from the book of belonging. You are still written into the center of my heart, into the folds where mercy flows freely, without end, without condition, without hesitation. So come as you are. No rewriting needed, no apology rehearsed. Just let me remind you that you were never removed. You were always included. You are still chosen. There were instances you didn't even notice. Split seconds when something changed in your day, when a conversation didn't go as planned, when a door didn't open, or a decision didn't finalize. Behind all of it was my hand, gently shifting the flow of time itself to preserve what mattered most. You. Not your reputation, not your plans. You. There were things set in motion that would have harmed you more deeply than you could comprehend. Without making a scene, I intervened. I allowed pauses that frustrated you. I created detours that confused you. I prolonged outcomes that you thought were being ignored. All the while, I watched with unwavering love as you questioned my timing, not realizing I was moving heaven and earth to protect something far more valuable than your momentary comfort. Your soul. I saw how fragile your heart had become under the weight of repeated disappointment. I saw how your trust was fraying because of delays that didn't make sense. But I never stopped working. What looked like inaction was actually divine orchestration. Every delay was a shield. Every interruption, a barrier to destruction. You thought time was slipping, that maybe you were falling behind. But I was stretching time like a covering, making sure what was forming inside of you wouldn't be crushed by what was happening around you. I've never been limited by clocks or calendars. I don't operate within the pressure of human deadlines. I function in love, and love is never late. I don't delay because I forget. I delay because I remember. I remember every promise I've spoken over you, every purpose etched into your being, every whisper of destiny that still waits to unfold. And because I remember, I've withheld what would have stolen your attention from what really matters. You've prayed for quick solutions, and I've answered with deeper transformation. You've asked for speed, and I've offered strength. You've looked for shortcuts, and I've brought you through the long, sacred road where character is shaped and roots grow deep. I have not postponed your breakthrough to torment you. I have preserved it for the version of you that will know how to carry it. That's how much you mean to me. I am not willing to lose you to a blessing that arrives before you're healed. I am not willing to give you a platform that your foundation can't yet support. I am not willing to watch you trade lasting joy for momentary applause. So I said, not yet, while you wept for right now. While you misunderstood my quietness, I was fighting battles in unseen places. I was holding back judgment that could have rightfully landed on your choices, not because I ignored what happened, but because my mercy outweighed what justice could have required. I have stood in the gap between what was deserved and what love decided. Every time I had to choose between giving you what you asked for or giving you what would save you, I chose you over and over again. My love is not passive. It rearranges timelines. It suspends outcomes. It cancels consequences when the heart still has room to turn. You have no idea how many times I've said to the storm, "Wait, not yet. They are still coming home." I've never once considered letting you go. Not when you forgot me. Not when you blamed me. Not even when you told yourself you didn't believe anymore. I chose patience over punishment. I chose presence over a verdict, because I don't measure your worth by your consistency. I measure it by my covenant, and that covenant has never changed. I gave all of myself so that you could know a love that doesn't give up, even when the world says it's too late. So, if you're still wondering why things took longer than expected, why some things never happened the way you thought they would, know this: it was never a delay for delay's sake. It was me holding time in my hands, refusing to lose you. You thought the shaking meant you were being punished, that the crumbling of what you once relied on was a sign of abandonment. But it wasn't my wrath that allowed the ground to tremble beneath you. It was my mercy. There were things you had grown used to, structures, patterns, beliefs, and identities that were never meant to carry the weight of your destiny. You built safety into them, unaware that they were quietly silencing the voice I placed within you. So when they began to fall apart, I didn't rush in to keep them standing. I stepped back just enough for the shaking to begin, not to watch you suffer, but to awaken the part of you that had been sleeping, the part that remembers who you really are. The world tried to press you into a mold, teaching you to suppress your questions, quiet your dreams, and live safely inside expectations that never fit the shape of your spirit. I saw how you traded wonder for survival, how you adjusted your light to fit into dim rooms. I could no longer allow that version of life to remain your normal. So I let the ground move beneath you. I let the walls crack, not to destroy, but to invite. The invitation wasn't loud. It came through disruption, through questions, through a longing that wouldn't go away no matter how much you tried to silence it. You called it discomfort. I called it awakening. You were made for more depth, more freedom, more presence. But first, the noise had to be removed, and nothing removes noise like a shaking. When the world no longer made sense, and the things you leaned on began to vanish, I was closer than ever. You weren't being ruined. You were being revealed. The shaking stripped away what was false. It dismantled the agreements you didn't realize you had made. Agreements with fear, with pressure, with shame. You were never meant to live small. You were never designed to stay numb. But the world taught you that being quiet and predictable would keep you safe. And I had to unsettle that lie. You cried out wondering why everything felt unstable, not realizing I was stirring life beneath the surface. The kind of life that can't grow in rigid comfort. The earthquake was never to harm you. It was to set your soul free from all the layers the world had piled on top of it. You thought you were losing yourself, but you were losing who you were never meant to be. A shaking. That was me pulling back the veil, showing you what could no longer stay. And through every collapse, I stood beside you, whispering, "Let it fall. I'm still here." You didn't know how much of your identity had been built around what others expected from you until I allowed those expectations to crumble. You didn't realize how tightly you held on to old labels until I removed the environments that reinforced them. And though it hurt, and though it left you breathless at times, something deeper began to breathe within you again. Purpose, passion, calling, identity. These are the things I was awakening. The parts of you that once danced with joy, that once believed with fire, that once prayed with tears. They were still there, and I refused to let them stay buried. I allowed the shaking to reveal what the surface had hidden. You've mistaken the storm for loss, but it's been a rescue all along. You don't yet see the strength forming inside of you, but you will. And when you look back, you'll see it wasn't the breaking that defined you. It was the rebuilding that followed, the awakening that could only come when everything else went still. I've never wasted your pain. I've only ever used it as soil, and what's about to grow from this ground will carry the scent of heaven. Amen. My beloved child, let this message echo beyond your screen. Send it to someone hungry for comfort, desperate for direction. These words are not bound by time, they are seeds for your tomorrow. The battle is fierce, but your spirit is ready. You've been set apart, called to walk in divine strength. Never forget, you belong to something sacred and vast. You are loved without end. If your soul has been stirred, subscribe and walk with us again. Each message a step further on the path of revelation and renewal. Share this with someone seeking shelter from the storm. Let them know there is peace. Until we gather again, hold fast to truth, shine with courage, and move forward as one who is chosen. Amen.